Last week we talked a little bit about the Gospels, and we started to talk about why they had different distinctives, and I kind of promised that we at some point would talk about what are the distinctives. Now, once again, if you're going to take an entire Gospel, an entire book, and try and distill it down to one word or just one concept, you can't do justice to it. So there's many themes, as we'll see as we're going through the book of Mark. We just started that. As we go through there, we're going to see there's many themes in there. But if you want to, I think it's helpful for us to know that basically what's the general gist that each of the Gospels brings to the table, so to speak. So I'm going to talk a little bit about 4 Gospels. As I said last week, we talked that they brought different facets. And I like that word facet because it's kind of like if you look at a diamond, not that a diamond would be this big, but if you looked at a diamond, you can be looking at this side and you're still seeing the diamond, but you're seeing a different side than if somebody's looking from this. And it's a different facet, but it's still the same diamond. And so it's different aspects or different facets to Jesus and who he is and his ministry. And while they still work together, they're still harmonized and provide us with what I like to say a plenary view or all-encompassing, holistic sort of view of his teachings and ministry. So the gospel distinctives, as I said, each has a different focus. They're not limited to just this focus, but for general purposes of understanding. I'm going to go through them. Matthew was primarily written to a Jewish audience, and so a lot of the focus that Matthew has are on things that the Jew or the believer who is the Old Testament Jew would understand as the fulfillment of God's promised Messiah, and they focus on Jesus as king. So even starting from the get-go of trying to establish Jesus' genealogy is talking about Jesus as king. Mark, the one that we're working through right now, was primarily written to a Roman audience. Now, it doesn't mean it just applies to a Roman audience, but it was primarily written that way, and so it tends to focus through things the way that Romans tend to look at things, and it focuses on Jesus as a servant, which would have been very prevalent in Roman society. Luke is written primarily to a Gentile audience. That's a beyond Jewish audience. Oftentimes people who were kind of aware of what the Messiah was, but sometimes not. But it was not primarily written just to Jews, and it focuses on Jesus as the Son of Man, which is an Old Testament reference from Daniel about the Son of Man, but it focuses on his humanity as Jesus being here. And finally, the book of John, which the first 3 we kind of said are much more similar. They have a lot of the same stories, a lot of the same things from different aspects, but John is very different. It's not part of the synoptic gospels, as they call it, and it really focuses on mankind in general. It's really, that's our way of saying, well, these focus on this, and this one really doesn't focus on one, but it focuses on mankind in general and focuses on Jesus as the Son of God. It tends to be much more of theological and philosophical and talking about things that people can think about who Jesus is and Jesus as God. So those are kind of the 4 different things. Another way I like to think about these is the Gospels by a prominent word. Matthew, fulfilled. If you had to kind of boil it down to one, fulfilled. It's a fulfillment of God's promises and the promised Messiah. Mark is immediately, the stories and the movement, it keeps going. It's a word that you'll find that appears so many times in Mark that really doesn't appear that many times elsewhere in the Bible. And it just shows the ministry of Jesus and over his power over the natural order. And then Luke, the Son of Man. And then John, the word believe. He writes everything so that you will believe. He wants you to believe and understand, and it's the theological concept. It's not just the stories of saying, I'm going to tell you a story, and then I want you to figure it out for yourself. It's saying, here's what the theological concepts are, believe. And so that's just kind of a general benefit of knowing the different aspects. And one last thing, although the Gospels each focus on a particular aspect of Jesus and his ministry, none of them are at odds with the others in Jesus' divinity, humanity, or purpose. Instead, they provide a different aspect to create an integrative or a fully constituted or holistic view of who Jesus was and is. And we don't even realize that we pull so many things from different places to understand who Jesus is, but we do pull these together and understand the whole nature of Jesus' humanity, divinity, and purpose all the way to the cross. So that's our moment of learning for today.